Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody. The podcast where we talk with people behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today we have two really fun special guests on. So we have Penny Johnson, who is the president and CEO of Texas Health Huguley Hospital, as well as Maggie Beaird, who is a director at the American Heart Association. And we're here today to talk about the Fort Worth Go Red for Women Luncheon. So the American Heart Association does Go Red for Women luncheons all throughout the country. So we're going to talk about a host of things today. One is about collaboration, since we've got someone from a hospital who's partnering with a nonprofit, but also how you give those national organization events a local feel within each individual chapter. So with that, Penny, Maggie, welcome. And I'm just so thrilled you both are here to join us today.
Thank you. Yeah, we're happy and excited to be here.
Amazing. So Maggie, I'm going to start with you. Talk about what the mission of the American Heart Association is.
Yeah, so the mission of the American Heart Association, we are the oldest and largest nonprofit. So it's a very large mission. And really our dream is to fight and eventually rid cardiovascular disease. It continues to be the number one killer amongst Americans. And so our mission is really centered around being that relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives, for all that are a part of this mission with us.
Very, very well said. And Penny, I'd love for you to share, what the mission is of Texas Health Huguley Hospital.
Absolutely. Our mission is extending the healing ministry of Christ. And we are a faith-based hospital that was founded in 1977. And when we talk about extending the healing ministry of Christ, that isn't about converting people. What it really is ensuring that every person that walks in our doors, whether a patient, a visitor, or an employee, really feels like they are a person of infinite value and loved by someone.
Thank you for describing that and how everyone is welcome through your doors when they are looking for and receiving care. And I'm fascinated to know, and I'm always interested in this because every single person gets involved with organizations in different ways, and I especially am interested in your answer, as the CEO of a hospital. But how did you initially get involved with the American Heart Association, Penny?
Well, friends get us in all kind of trouble, don't they? So a colleague of mine had shared the Go Red Luncheon, Becky Tucker, and she had referred me to Brooke, who's with the American Heart Association. So they paid me a visit, and I think the thing that really hooked me, because just like all of us, you're getting bombarded with all kinds of safety net organizations that are all incredibly worthy. I mean, there's no safety net organization that is not worth our time and talents. But it was kind of an aha when they shared with me that heart disease is the number one killer of women. And I don't think people hear that. I think they automatically think breast cancer, they think all these other things. And so to hear that, and knowing also on my husband's side, a lot of heart disease, that it just kind of resonated with me. And then when I got involved, it's fun too. I mean, no one wants to do something that's not fun. And so they had a great Maggie and the whole team at Tarrant County American Heart Association make giving back fun and meaningful at the same time.
Very well said. And I love that it was actually an event, and the event that we're actually here to talk about is how you initially got involved with the organization. I kind of love that. It's almost like it's a full circle moment for you. And I'm glad that you mentioned, and we'll talk about this a little bit more about how heart disease is the number one killer of women. But before we do that, I want to talk about collaboration because, a hospital is a big entity. And obviously, the American Heart Association is a very large nonprofit looking to rid cardiovascular disease. So I'd love for Maggie to go first with this one, and then Penny can chime in afterward. But Maggie, talk a little bit about how Texas Health Huguley Hospital and the American Heart Association collaborate with one another.
Yeah, I love that Penny said that it's fun because it is a fun collaboration. Every time that we get to sit down with Penny and her team, just ideas start flowing about how can we not only create an impact in our community, but something that's sustainable, right? Something that is not this one-stop shop, something that can continue to affect families generationally, community members generationally. And so one thing that they came to us last year and said is, hey, we really have an emphasis on blood pressure, hypertension. A lot of times, people don't necessarily wake up. We don't expect them to do this, but wake up and say, I think I'm going to take my blood pressure today and see what this whole diastolic, systolic thing means. And then what do I do with those numbers? Where do I go? Honestly, it's not something that just most of the time is second nature. And so one of our primary focuses is we know that hypertension is a silent killer. It's something that creeps up on you. It's something that if it goes uncontrolled and unmanaged over a period of time, it leads to that cardiovascular disease and death. And so how can we put the resource of something like a validated blood pressure in a community center that affects a lot of different people to have that resource? And so we put our heads together and partnered with Texas Health Huguley and their support to launch a blood pressure initiative at the Burleson Public Library. And so this serves over 18,000 registered patrons who now, because of Texas Health Huguley support, they can go in, they can check out a validated blood pressure monitor. They have resources to say, hey, this is how you can do it yourself at any time where you are. You don't have to go into a specific office or things like that. We're going to meet you where you are. We're going to know what those numbers mean. And then how can we control it, right? If it's in this range that's not quote unquote correct, then what do I do now? And what lifestyle factors can I be implementing so that I can make sure that is it's within range? And so that was really what was made possible because of Texas Health Huguley's support and their passion to do something close, because the need is right here. So it was a really, really fun initiative this past year that we did with them.
That sounds really cool. And the fact that you're able to impact, tens of thousands of people, with something, it's, yes, people don't think about, oh, I got to take my blood pressure this morning. But for a lot of people, it really is kind of a life and death thing. You've got to really monitor it because you could get into a lot of health issues by not monitoring that. So I really appreciate that answer. And Penny, I'm going to turn to you, and I'd love for you to talk about how Texas Health Huguley collaborates with the American Heart Association. But I'd also, in your answer, if you wouldn't mind, explaining what about the American Heart Association, because you had mentioned earlier, there are so many worthy organizations out there. What about the American Heart Association stood out for you to, collaborate with them, where you took something where you attended and you had fun on a personal level and you brought it into, the professional realm with the hospital?
Absolutely. I want to comment on the whole library initiative before, just because it for me, that was so much fun, and not because I did anything, but because I recently rediscovered the library. I'm an empty nester now, so I have time to read, and we're buying all these books, and my husband and I are like, why are we not going to the library? So we went to the library, and our public library is amazing. I mean, there's so many things you can do. You can check out an American Girl doll at the library now. And so you really learn that there's this whole cadre of things that our library is supporting. And so it was, to me, it was another great, here's a safety net organization, here's a nonprofit, here's a community asset that are all triangulating to make a difference in a way nobody, would have even thought of. And people will probably walk by and say, oh, I can check out a blood pressure cuff. This will be fun. And who knows? It's like the Apple Watch. Who knows that one person that maybe figures out they have hypertension? So I loved that initiative. But, I think the thing about the American Heart does really well for me as a volunteer and as someone, the first thing I did with them was Women of Impact. And it's a thing where you get nominated, but I mean, let's be clear, your goal is to help raise money. And if you raise the most money, then you win and you're the Woman of Impact. And I was a little inundated by that. I'm not a shrinking violet, but I don't love asking people for money. And one of the things they told me is, you're not asking people for money, you're giving people an opportunity to make an impact. If they don't want to do it, that's fine. But they really reframed for me what fundraising was in some of these safety net organizations. And then they made it super easy. So that's the other blessing. And that, hey, do you have 10 friends you want to reach out to? Kind of tell me. They were like my own personal AI before I had ChatGPT, right? So I would say, you know what, I want to do this, and these are the 3 things, and they would help me. They'd craft the email. So I didn't have to think about doing that, because we're all busy, but it's not my full-time job, it's their full-time job. And so then I just had to send that email. So that's how it started. So it was Women of Impact, and I kind of thought it was going to be a one and done. And I walked away and really saw all the people in that ballroom get behind a movement that I was really impressed by. And so then when I had the opportunity to come back around and serve ELT, it just kind of kept snowballing. And it works so well with Texas Health Huguley as well, because we have a very robust and very advanced cardiovascular service line. And so it's very aligned with what we're trying to do. We do want to put ourselves out of business. You know, we'll find something else to do, but if we're not doing heart surgeries or stenting people's arteries, that's a great thing. So it just all married together. And so now I have been, they were gracious to ask me to serve on the board. And so I'll do that the next 3 years. And they're a fabulous team.
Very well said. And I love how it kind of weaved things in there, and you talked about, and this is one thing, especially with, with donations and people who are busy professionals like yourself, Penny, is, a good organization is going to give you the tools to convey what you want to convey to, the friends that you want to ask that, to be involved, so that you can receive the things like the Impact Award. So it's, it's one of those things where the collaboration also extends to the relationships that you have with the individual people, in the organization. And Maggie, I want to direct this next question to you. Talk a little bit about, because one of the reasons that collaborations work is because of long-term planning. So talk about the importance of long-term planning when you're choosing strategic collaborative initiatives, for the American Heart Association, whether it's with, whether it's with Texas Health Huguley or any other organization that you partner with.
Yeah, I really love that question. And it kind of feeds into Penny's response just now of our goal and priority is we want to uplift our donors, our volunteers, our community connectors, what's important to them. Penny's prioritized this mission. She's brought it to her network, her friends, her family. She's also brought it into her workplace, and has made this something that people stop and take a second and say, hey, we've got to focus and prioritize on this before it's too late, because it is our number one health risk. Everyone, it's our number one health risk. It doesn't matter if you're 4 years old. It doesn't matter if you're 40. It doesn't matter if you're 84. That's the thing that is so unfortunate about heart disease. And so I think to answer that question of the long-term planning is, it isn't a one-stop shop. I said that before and I stand by it. It is a sustainable change, a sustainable effort. Where can me as an individual, where can my community members go and seek resources that's not only going to affect me, but it's going to affect my kids, and my family generationally. And so that long-term planning piece is really painting that picture of, okay, maybe we're putting the blood pressure kits into the Burleson Public Library right now, but maybe in 10, 15 years, like Penny said, there's somebody whose blood pressure who now has sought care, has controlled blood pressure, and has gained 15, 20 years back on their lives because they thought, oh, I'm 23. I wouldn't have high blood pressure. Why would I have high blood pressure? And it jumped off the page. And that is true and prominent. We do a lot of things around hypertension. We do a lot of things in nutrition security. I think when people think about the Heart Association, they may not initially jump to food, but food is medicine. And how do we put, nutritious, refrigerated produce that's accessible to our community members? We do a huge thing in CPR, a huge focus, and that's a big part of the Go Red movement this year is CPR. Is how do we get one person in every household to know what to do? You don't have to be trained, you don't have to be certified, but can you take 45 seconds to learn what the basics are so that you feel empowered and you feel confident to save a life? That's what it is. It's a life-saving skill. And so that's our long-term planning. What is important? And it changes. It's fun when we get to talk to Texas Health Huguley because they're saying, hey, we'd love to prioritize blood pressure this year, create that sustainable change. Maybe we want to explore CPR in future years or nutrition security, whatever it may be. It's that constant collaboration. It's that constant communication of what's important to you, what is a priority for you, how can we uplift that? And so that's something that's special about the working and collaborating with those in our market is it is a long term. You hit the nail on the head. It's a long term, sustainable impact that we can drive to impact generations to come.
I'm glad you brought up that sustainability piece because it's great to put out things, but they have to be available for the long term. And I really appreciated the anecdote you mentioned about CPR. And it's not just about sustainability, but it's also giving people the tools to be sustainable. So it doesn't mean you have to have the fanciest shovel, but it means you have to have a good shovel that works. And if you give them the basics on what to do to be empowered, if someone does need CPR and there's one person in the house to do that, you're doing that. So I'm glad you mentioned you don't have to necessarily be certified, but you can know what to do. And I think that was a really good anecdote for that to share. And Penny, I'd love to hear your take on, how long-term planning affects how you do strategic collaborations with, American Heart Association or perhaps any other organizations you're partnering with.
I think with the American Heart Association, it's really about, they do a different type of research and a different kind of community look than we do. We ourselves do a community health needs assessment as a nonprofit organization. We do that every 3 years. And so when we're talking to Maggie or any safety net organization, we're saying, okay, when we look at our community, which is pretty much South Tarrant County and Johnson County, that's our main target service area. What are the community health needs assessments? So obviously cardiovascular disease has married up really well with that. This is not a plug for the March of Dimes, but we also have partnered with the March of Dimes because we are a high delivery hospital, and a lot of our service area does have poor infant birth rates. And so that's what we look for is where are we trying to change, bend the curve per se. And I love, Maggie and has taught me a lot about AEDs this year. We've been talking about that as we talk about CPR, and I've learned AEDs have to be registered. You want them to be registered. They're supposed to be within so many feet. And even like I put that on an agenda item for my exec team. I'm like, even in a hospital, are they all within the walking distance and are they all registered? And so I think as you learn more, then you not only get to share it with your organization, but you share that with your friends. It's just like gossip, right? It's you share that with your friends, they share that, and it naturally people begin to learn more about these things. And I think that's one of the power of how many people sit in the American Heart Luncheon, Maggie?
Last year we had a little over 550.
So if you think of 550 people, if they go say, you know what I learned? And if they tell 5 people, the extrapolation of that is just so large.
And the scale of that and effectively conveying your mission. And that is so, I'm really glad you brought that piece up, Penny, because that is so key and that's so critical. It's a good event allows you to amplify that message well beyond the people in the room. And there's a whole host of different ways to do that. And, if you got the right message and they tell 5 friends and they tell 5 friends, and that's kind of how organically an organization can really grow their impact in the community. And Penny, I'd love for you to share, a moment in, the collaboration with American Heart Association that you are particularly proud of.
It was really last year. So we had done very well with the luncheon, and Maggie sent out an email to some of her I won't say her key people, but some people she knows that really like to get behind it, and said, we are so close to breaking a record and a milestone, and I'll let her share what that was. But and so we sent out, the SOS to some of our friends and family and colleagues, and we're able to see those people rally and for us to set that record. So I'd say last year was really just a milestone for Tarrant County American Heart Association. I was just happy to be a cog in the wheel.
An important one at that. So thank you for sharing that. And that actually is the perfect segue to kind of talk a little bit about the Go Red event. And I'm going to direct this next question to Maggie. So, I know the Go Red for Women Luncheon, it's specifically to highlight how heart disease affects women, specifically and broadly. So talk about how you share that message at the event in an impactful way.
Yeah, I think um, something that's really special about the event is in Tarrant County, we want everyone to leave feeling a little bit more empowered than when they came in. They left with a piece of knowledge. Knowledge is power. They left with something that they didn't know before, like Penny just mentioned, AEDs. And so that has become a priority for her in her personal life and in her professional life. And that's our hope and our vision when attendees leave our luncheon every year is what is that they have learned and have been able to take away. Um, right now, it stands that 1 in 3 women die of cardiovascular disease. It's a crazy statistic. There's 3 women on this call. And so to think about that right there is alarming and something that we're looking to change. It claims more lives than all forms of cancer combined. And we know that 80% we can control. So what is that little piece that they can take away with and empower each other? As women, we're doing it all. We're uh, prioritizing our families, our careers, our extracurriculars, our friends. We had a few years ago someone who spoke at one of our events, and she pulled up her calendar, which is probably very, very similar to Penny's calendar right now. We're not going to make her pull it up, but it was a crazy, crazy calendar. And she said, see all of these days, and I started my day at 6:45 a.m. and I ended my day at 7:30 p.m. I was having a stroke this entire week and just had no idea. And that is what we're hoping that people can leave with is what are my signs? What are my symptoms? They look different. They look very different than our male counterparts. And so spreading that awareness piece, spreading that education piece so that people have the confidence and the empowerment to say, hey, we've got to prioritize us. We've got to prioritize our health. We've got to advocate that if something's not right, something's not right. Because it is our greatest health threat. And that's what we are. That is our hope. That is my intention every year from the second an attendee walks in that door to the second that they leave is what is a life-saving piece of information that they took away with. And it wouldn't be possible without our pennies in the room that are bringing people in and are advocating for this messaging and then are leaving the ballroom and say, how can we push this beyond the ballroom walls? And they are the hands and feet of that. They are what make that happen. Which is just, it's really impressive and really exciting to watch.
That was so well said. And I'm glad you mentioned, that, there's differences in how, a heart attack or a cardiovascular incident, it affects a male differently than it affects a female. So I'm glad that you brought up those things and just kind of paying attention and understanding the specific signs of, a person who may be experiencing that. And gosh, that story is harrowing that someone had a stroke for a week and didn't know. I mean, that's a really impactful thing. And that just kind of goes to show that, a stroke is not, I think, what people often see on TV, which is, they wind up in a wheelchair and they can't move. There's all different ways that can happen. So I'm really glad that you highlighted that because it's an important thing. And I have a follow-up question, because, we've been talking quite a bit about the mission. And, with the American Heart Association hosting the Go Red Luncheons all over the country, talk about how you highlight the mission of a global organization while at the same time giving the event a Tarrant County / Fort Worth feel.
Yeah, that is my favorite question because it's the number one question that we get asked. This is a huge mission. It impacts people so differently. And how can we drive impact here in Tarrant County? And so I think one specific way that we highlight that is that engagement piece that I touched on earlier about what are we doing in nutrition security here in our zip code, in our schools? What are we doing about CPR here for youth sports, for schools, for community organizations, for clinics, for hospitals? Just because they're in that field and they're around it all the time, our hospitals are typically one of the first ones to come up and say, hey, we want to make sure that we're within the guidelines and doing what we need to do to always be practicing best safety measures. And so that's really how we make this national disease of cardiovascular disease being the number one killer in every state, in every place, and localizing it here. Okay, but what is Tarrant County doing about it? And how are we bringing that impact here? And being able to use people's testimonies and their personal stories to say, hey, this has happened to me, especially if they're 12. My goodness, the bravery and the courage it takes for one of our awesome kiddos to come forward and say, I'm a heart survivor, and this is my story, and I thought that it was an old man's disease, and it's not. And an AED saved my life because I played football on a Friday night and went into cardiac arrest. It's those kinds of things that we want to send messaging out to our community to say, this is our priority, this is our focus. This is how we're making a local footprint on a national movement.
I love how you just said you talk about, how is this impacting here and tying that in so that people understand, yes, it's a global issue and yes, it's a global problem, but it also affects people right at home. And I think that's a really, good, important insight to have. And Penny, I'd like to address the next question to you. And this is going to be this will be a fun one because you initially got involved through a Go Red Luncheon. So how do you use events like the Go Red for Women Luncheon to further connect with other potential donors and sponsors, and really kind of how you're paying it forward from when you initially got involved when a friend invited you?
Well, I have a great example actually. So one of the ways when you're doing Women of Impact to raise the kind of funds that you aspire to raise, you really have to lean into some of your corporate partners. And we have a long-standing relationship with the Beck Company. They've done a lot of construction on this campus, and so they bought a table, came to the luncheon. One of their partners, Jennifer, became very inspired by the mission, and now she's actually serving on the executive leadership team this year. And so if I had not been asked to do Women of Impact, if I had not given Jennifer and Beck the opportunity to make a difference in our community, then we wouldn't have had that person. And so I think it's not about, let's be clear, getting the money's great. That is what allows for the research that changes lives. So that is critically important. But when you can get people in the room and say, hey, it's going to be fun, there's going to be an auction, there's going to be this and that, it's not going to take too much of your time. We're not making you get a 3-hour commitment here either. I think you've always got to be efficient. And you get them to actually see it, then you get those occasions where you spark some interest of someone who really says, okay, I want to be a part of this. And for some people, they have their own thing too, and that's great. But it's that inspiration that we all live in a community that is, growing and vibrant, but has a lot of needs. And, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so find your way to plug in. And I think the American Heart Association creates those moments when they host events like the Go Red for Women.
I'm really glad you brought that up. And I love that example because basically, you brought someone else in from one of your corporate contacts and they're paying it forward. And, all really good events, there's always an evolution of who is involved with the organization. It's never the same exact people every single year, because if it did, it would get boring and people would eventually stop going. So I'm glad that you brought that in, that, it's not going to be everybody, but there will be some people. It's like any sales, for quote unquote, for lack of a better term. There's going to be a percentage that come through the door that are going to convert, and there's a percentage that are, thank you, I had a really great time, but as Penny said, my heart's truly here and this is where I'm going to devote most of my time, but I may buy a ticket in the future and still support and come out. So I'm glad that you, Penny, you really discerned the difference with that. And while we're on the luncheon, Maggie, share a little bit about what guests can expect to experience at this year's Go Red for Women Luncheon.
Yeah, we're excited. It's going to be a really high energy day. It's coming up on February 20th. And our focus, we always try to do a fun theme, something a little bit different than other markets. And so this year we're getting in the Go Red groove. Lots of disco, lots of Bee Gees, Staying Alive, lots of high energy, but we always have more of a purpose behind that theme and why we chose it, why we do what we do. Of course, when you ask the majority of people that we talk to about CPR, one of the first things they ask us is Staying Alive still the song? And so that's to the beat of CPR. And hey, whatever resonates and whatever sticks in people's minds, we appreciate. And so we kind of ran with that this year. And we have an amazing team that's been incredibly collaborative and been thinking outside of the box of how can we integrate that messaging of CPR, keeping the beat outside of the ballroom. So our hope and our vision this year is to have individuals come in and learn that skill, have the confidence, have the knowledge, have the power to jump in and be a difference maker in that chain of survival, because time is of the essence. And I think that that's one of the biggest messaging, is that we don't have time to wait. We can't have hesitation. We can't have people come in and think, oh, am I going to, get in legal trouble? Am I going to hurt them? I'm just going to make it worse. I've never, ever had any experience with CPR ever. Like, surely somebody else can do this. It's breaking down that barrier of, no, you can, and you can be a lifesaver. And so there's that empowerment piece. It's going to be really fun to be able to spread that messaging. Our hope is that people do leave feeling empowered and inspired. And it really came from the minds of our amazing volunteers like Penny, who've said, hey, we've got to focus on CPR. We've got to get this messaging out there. It's quick to learn. It's a big movement that is so life-saving, and is a skill that people can take away from a luncheon where we can have all 550 people at once. So one time a year we get to do it. And so we want to be able to provide that opportunity for people to interact with in our ballroom, which we're very excited about.
That, people, is how you incorporate a theme in a fun, unique, and novel way. That is absolutely brilliant. CPR, Staying Alive, you tied it all together and you made it sound so effortless. And, sometimes the best event ideas, I don't want to say they're the most obvious ones, but they're right there. Don't be afraid to lean into them, because what you described is really, really, really a lot of fun, and red was a big color in the 70s. So, there's lots of different ties there. So I loved everything about that answer. And I know we're coming up on time here. So I always like to end with this type of question. And Maggie, you'll go first, and then Penny, you can have the last word. And that is, what is one thing all successful events have in common?
People. It really is. I think that's the first gut reaction that I have, is individuals like Penny. Penny is a change maker here. She is the hands and feet of what we do. And she has not only grown our mission, but has also pulled in others to be a part of our mission. And I've gotten the privilege to watch over the past several years, and have a relationship with Penny where she's continuing to push our boundaries of think big, think larger, be innovative. We do. And so it's an event that we love. We call it the exclamation point on our year, because it's where we get to come together and we get to celebrate. But they're the hands and feet that make this mission move forward. the other 364 days of the year. And it wouldn't be possible without them. And so that's what fuels my fire. That's what wakes me up in the morning, is to be able to work with individuals like Penny, and so many on our executive leadership team who are moving this mission forward and are prioritizing it, because a life is depending on it. And that's just the bottom line. And so it really is an honor.
Very well said. And people are such a critical part to any event success. And Penny, you get the last word. What is one thing you think all successful events have in common?
It's such a big question, and I should have been thinking, but I was listening to Maggie's answer.
I stole the one everybody's gonna say.
No, I do think it's a worthwhile cause, and that sounds really mundane, but I think it's a worthwhile cause that you can put in a touching, tangible way. And I think that's what we're doing in Tarrant County. Is American Heart Association, you said it earlier, Rob, it can seem so big, it can seem so national. And when you can take it like we've done in Tarrant County, and you can make it so personal, and people really believe they can make an impact. And I think that's, as humans, that's what we want to do. So I think when you can take a mission, make it local, and make people feel like they can really make a difference, that's a successful event.
That's so well said. And it's actually the perfect ending, because the through line of that was heart. It was all about, creating kind of that emotional heart to get people involved and to get them giving back into their community. And I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation. So, Maggie, Penny, thank you both so much for joining us today. This was a real pleasure, and I really enjoyed chatting with both of you.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Rob.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Absolutely. And the Fort Worth Go Red for Women Luncheon, benefiting the American Heart Association, will be held on February 20th, 2026 in Fort Worth, Texas. For more information, please visit heart.org/Tarrant County Go Red. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.